The gunshot echoed through the dusty plains of West Texas as Yates McAllister aimed his rifle at another rattlesnake threatening his cattle. It was the summer of 1875, and the scorching heat bore down on his shoulders like an unwanted burden, much like the loneliness that had taken residence in his heart for the past 3 years since his parents' passing. "That's the third one this week," Yates muttered to himself, watching the snake's body twist in its final moments. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to talking to himself, to the wind, to his horse, anything to break the silence of his modest ranch 15 miles outside San Antonio. The sun was beginning its descent as Yates led his chestnut mare back to the barn. Dust clung to his weathered face, settling into the fine lines around his blue eyes. He wasn't an old man by any means, but life on the frontier had a way of aging a person beyond their years. His boots scuffed against the wooden floor of the barn as he unsaddled his horse. "There you go, Penny," he said, patting the mare's neck. "Another day done." The soft rustling from the hayloft above might have gone unnoticed if not for the absolute stillness of the evening. Yates froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip. Rustlers weren't uncommon, but they usually didn't hide in a man's barn. "Who's there?" he called out, drawing his gun. "Show yourself." The rustling stopped abruptly, followed by a tense silence. "I ain't asking twice," Yates warned, cocking the hammer. A small voice, fragile and feminine, drifted down from above. "Please, I mean no harm." Yates kept his gun trained on the hayloft ladder as a face emerged from the shadows. A woman, her face smudged with dirt and what looked like dried blood, peered down at him with wide, frightened eyes. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, and her dress, once white, he guessed was torn and soiled. "What in tarnation?" Yates muttered, keeping his revolver raised. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my barn?" The woman's eyes darted nervously to the open barn door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. I needed somewhere to hide." "Hide from what?" Yates demanded. She climbed down the ladder with trembling hands, nearly stumbling on the last rung. When she turned to face him fully, Yates could see a nasty bruise blooming on her cheekbone and a cut on her lower lip. "My name is Ruby Harrington," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't send me back. He'll kill me if you do." Yates lowered his gun slightly, taken aback by the raw fear in her eyes. "Who'll kill you?" Ruby's gaze dropped to the floor. "My husband." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Yates had seen his share of difficult marriages in town, had even intervened once when a drunkard was beating his wife in the street outside the saloon. But the terror in this woman's eyes spoke of something beyond the ordinary. "How long have you been up there?" he asked, holstering his revolver. "Since last night," she admitted. "I saw your ranch from the road. You were away, and I didn't know where else to go." Yates studied her, noting how she flinched when he took a step closer. She couldn't have been more than 25, with delicate features despite the bruising. Something protective stirred within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. "You're hurt," he stated plainly. Ruby touched her cheek self-consciously. "It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." Yates sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. Night was falling and the temperature would drop soon. He couldn't very well leave her out here. "Come on to the house. You need water and food, I reckon." Fear flashed across her face. "If he finds me here, who's your husband?" Yates interrupted. "Victor Harrington." Yates's jaw tightened. Victor Harrington was a wealthy businessman from San Antonio, respected in some circles, feared in others. There had been whispers about his temper, but most folks were too intimidated by his connections to say much. "I know of him," Yates said grimly, "but he's not finding you tonight." My ranch is isolated enough and I don't get many visitors. Ruby hesitated, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. I give you my word, Yates added, his voice softening. No harm will come to you under my roof. After a long moment, Ruby nodded and took a tentative step forward. Yates led her out of the barn, glancing back to ensure Penny was settled for the night, then guided Ruby toward the modest farmhouse that had been his home since birth. The interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace dominating the main room. Yates immediately set about building a fire, while Ruby stood awkwardly near the door, as if preparing for a quick escape if necessary. "Sit," he instructed, pointing to a chair at the small wooden table. "I'll heat some water for you to wash up, and there's stew from this morning." Ruby sank into the chair, her exhaustion evident in every movement. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Yates McAllister, but just Yates will do." As Yates moved around the kitchen, heating water and serving up a bowl of venison stew, he couldn't help noticing how Ruby's eyes followed him warily, like a wounded animal anticipating another strike. It stirred something in his chest, anger at whoever had caused such fear, and a determination to show her that not all men were to be feared. "Here," he said, placing the bowl in front of her along with a chunk of bread. "Eat. Then we can talk about what happens next." Ruby stared at the food as if it might disappear. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Not asking for payment," Yates replied, taking a seat across from her. "Just doing what any decent person would do." As Ruby ate, Yates observed the way her hands shook, the careful movements as if each bite might be her last. When she had finished, he brought her warm water and a clean cloth for her face. "May I ask how long you've been married?" he inquired, keeping his distance to avoid making her uncomfortable. Ruby dabbed at the cut on her lip before answering. 2 years. Victor courted me when my father fell ill. He seemed so kind then, so generous. He paid for the doctor, for medicines." Her voice hardened. "After father died and we were married, Victor changed. People like that don't change," Yates said. "They just stop pretending." Ruby's eyes met his, something like recognition flashing within them. "You sound like you know from experience." Yates shrugged. "Seen it enough." "My father taught me that a man who raises his hand to a woman is no man at all." A single tear slipped down Ruby's cheek, which she quickly wiped away. "Victor has powerful friends. The law won't touch him. I tried to leave once before, but he found me and, well." She gestured to her bruised face. "What made you run this time?" Yates asked quietly. Ruby's hand unconsciously went to her midsection. "I'm with child, and I won't let my baby grow up with a monster." The revelation hung in the air between them. Yates leaned back in his chair, considering the complexity of the situation. A pregnant woman on the run from a powerful, abusive husband was trouble, the kind of trouble that could get a man killed if he wasn't careful. But looking at Ruby's battered face and the determined set of her jaw, he knew he couldn't turn her away. "You can stay here tonight," he decided. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. I've got a spare room. It was my mother's sewing room, but there's a cot." Relief washed over Ruby's features, followed quickly by anxiety. "If Victor comes looking, then I'll deal with him," Yates cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But for now, you need rest. Come on, I'll show you where you can sleep." The small room was neat but sparsely furnished, with a narrow cot against one wall and a chest of drawers that had belonged to Yates's mother. He pulled out a clean nightshirt, one of his own, and a blanket from a trunk at the foot of the cot. "It ain't much," he said, suddenly aware of how humble his offerings were compared to what she must be accustomed to as Harrington's wife. "It's perfect," Ruby replied, sincerity warming her voice for the first time. "I can't thank you enough." Yates nodded awkwardly. "Well, I'll leave you to get some rest. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I'm a light sleeper, so if you need anything, just call out." As he turned to leave, Ruby caught his sleeve. "Mr. McAllister, Yates, why are you helping me?" Yates considered her question, the honest answer simple yet somehow too revealing. "Because it's right," he said instead. "Good night, Mrs. Harrington." "Ruby," she corrected him. "Just Ruby." With a nod, Yates left her to settle in, heading to his own room across the hall. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, solitary life had just been irrevocably changed, and strangely, he found he didn't mind. Morning came with the insistent crowing of Yates's rooster. He dressed quickly and moved quietly through the house, not wanting to disturb Ruby if she was still sleeping. The events of the previous night almost seemed like a dream until he spotted the empty bowl on the table where she had eaten. A soft creak from behind made him turn. Ruby stood in the doorway of the spare room, wearing her tattered dress again. In the morning light, the bruise on her face looked even more pronounced, a sickly purple against her pale skin. "Good morning," Yates said, feeling oddly self-conscious. "Did you sleep?" Ruby nodded. "Better than I have in months, thank you. Hungry?" "Yes, but I don't want to impose further." Yates waved off her concern. "No imposition. Sit down, I'll fix us some eggs and bacon." As they ate breakfast, Yates outlined his thoughts. "You can't stay here indefinitely," he began, watching as her face fell. "Not because I don't want to help," he quickly clarified, "but because this would be the first place Harrington would look if he tracks you this far. We need to get you somewhere safer." "Where could I possibly go?" Ruby asked, despair creeping into her voice. "Victor has connections all over Texas." Yates considered this. "I have a friend, a Comanche, who took a Christian name, Joshua. He lives with his people on land about 3 days' ride from here. Victor Harrington's reach doesn't extend there." Hope flickered briefly in Ruby's eyes before doubt extinguished it. "I couldn't ask you to take me so far. You've already risked enough." "I'm offering," Yates said firmly. "Besides, I need to make the journey anyway. Joshua trades horses with me, and I'm overdue for a visit." It wasn't entirely true he'd traded with Joshua just a month prior, but the lie came easily if it meant easing Ruby's conscience. "What about your ranch?" she questioned. "My neighbor's boy can look after things for a week. He's done it before when I've had to travel." Ruby studied him, as if trying to understand his motivations. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Yates met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I've been alone too long and forgotten what it's like to help someone. Or maybe I just don't take kindly to men who beat their wives." After a moment of silence, Ruby nodded. "When would we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Yates decided. "Today we need to prepare. And you need better clothes for the journey. Can't have you riding in that dress." By mid-morning, Yates had ridden to his nearest neighbor's ranch 5 miles away. The Hendersons were good folk who'd helped Yates after his parents died. Mrs. Henderson, upon hearing a carefully edited version of the situation, a woman in trouble, needing safe passage to distant relatives, immediately offered some of her daughter's old clothes, who had married and moved to Dallas the previous year. "These should fit her well enough," Mrs. Henderson said, packing a riding skirt, 2 blouses and undergarments into a bundle. "And take these preserves too. Nothing builds strength like good food." When Yates returned, he found Ruby in the barn, gently brushing Penny's mane. The horse, usually wary of strangers, stood calmly under her touch. "She likes you," Yates observed, setting down the bundle of clothes. Ruby smiled a genuine smile that transformed her face despite the bruising. "I've always loved horses. Victor wouldn't let me near the stables. Said it wasn't proper for a lady of my station." "Well, you'll be riding one for 3 days straight soon enough," Yates replied, unfolding the riding skirt for her to see. "Mrs. Henderson sent these. Hope they fit." Ruby's fingers brushed over the fabric reverently. "They're perfect. I'll have to thank her someday." "You can thank her by staying safe," Yates said. "Now let's see about getting you comfortable on a horse. You ever ridden before?" "My father taught me as a girl, but it's been years." Yates nodded. "You can ride Penny. She's gentle. I'll take Storm, he's more spirited, but he's used to longer journeys." The rest of the day was spent in preparations. Yates taught Ruby how to saddle and mount properly, watching as her natural grace returned with practice. He packed provisions, ammunition, and bedrolls, mapping their route in his mind. They would need to avoid the main roads and towns where Harrington might have eyes and ears. That evening, as they sat by the fire after a simple supper, Ruby broke the comfortable silence. "Tell me about yourself, Yates. How did you come to live alone on this ranch?" Yates poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "Not much to tell. This land's been in my family for 2 generations. My grandfather settled here after fighting in the Mexican-American War. My father expanded it, raised cattle. I was their only child, born late in their lives. They died within months of each other 3 years ago, mother from fever, father from what the doctor called heart failure, but I reckon it was heartbreak." "I'm sorry," Ruby said softly. Yates shrugged. "That's life out here, hard and unforgiving sometimes. What about you? Before Harrington, I mean." Ruby's gaze turned distant, remembering. "I grew up outside Austin. My mother died when I was young. My father was a school teacher. He taught me to read, write, appreciate poetry. He wanted me to become a teacher too, but then he fell ill." Her expression hardened. "That's when Victor appeared, all charm and promises. Father thought he was securing my future." "Your father couldn't have known," Yates offered. "No," Ruby agreed, her hand moving to her stomach in what was becoming a familiar gesture. "And now I must secure my child's future." Yates found himself staring at the protective way she cradled her barely visible pregnancy. Something fierce and protective surged within him, a desire to ensure that this woman and her unborn child would never know fear again. "We should get some rest," he said, standing abruptly to mask the intensity of his emotions. "Dawn comes early." That night, as he lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of his home, the settling of wooden beams, the distant howl of a coyote, Yates realized he was more alive than he'd felt in years. The thought of the journey ahead, of having a purpose beyond the daily routines of ranching, filled him with an unexpected energy. And if a part of that energy came from the woman sleeping across the hall, well, that was a complication he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The journey began as planned at first light. Ruby wore the riding skirt and a blue blouse that brought out the hints of copper in her dark hair, now neatly braided. The bruise on her face had begun to fade to a yellowish hue, and there was a determined set to her jaw as she mounted Penny with newfound confidence. Yates had secured the ranch and left instructions with young Timothy Henderson. As they rode away from the only home he'd ever known, Yates felt a strange mix of trepidation and anticipation. "We'll head west first," he explained, pointing to the distant hills. "Stay off the main trails. It'll add a day to our journey, but it's safer." Ruby nodded, adjusting her hat against the rising sun. "Lead the way." The first day passed without incident. They rode through rolling grasslands that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Yates kept them at a steady pace, not wanting to tire the horses unnecessarily. They made camp that evening in a small grove of trees near a creek, the water providing a welcome respite from the heat. As Yates built a small fire, Ruby unsaddled Penny with practiced ease, her movements already more confident than they had been the day before. "You're a quick learner," Yates observed. Ruby smiled. the expression becoming more natural on her face with each passing hour away from her husband. "It's coming back to me, like my body remembers even if my mind forgot." They ate a simple meal of jerky, beans, and biscuits. Mrs. Henderson had packed. The night was clear, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Texas sky. "It's beautiful," Ruby murmured, gazing upward. "I'd forgotten how many stars there are when you're away from town." Yates followed her gaze. "My father taught me the constellations when I was a boy. Said a man could never truly be lost if he could read the stars." "Will you teach me?" Ruby asked. And so Yates found himself pointing out the patterns in the sky: the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, the North Star, while Ruby listened with rapt attention, her face illuminated by firelight. It was the most he'd spoken to anyone in months, and the realization was both startling and oddly comforting. "We should sleep," he finally said, noticing how Ruby stifled a yawn. "You take the bedroll closer to the fire. I'll keep watch for a while." Ruby hesitated. "You need rest too." "I'm used to short nights," Yates assured her. "Go on." As Ruby settled into her bedroll, Yates positioned himself against a tree trunk, rifle across his lap. He watched as her breathing deepened into sleep, her face relaxing in a way he hadn't yet seen. Something twisted in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name, or perhaps didn't want to. The second day brought them into more desolate territory. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Yates kept a careful eye on Ruby, ensuring she drank enough water and rested in whatever shade they could find during the hottest part of the day. "How are you holding up?" he asked during one such rest, noticing the tiredness around her eyes. "I'm fine," Ruby insisted, though her hand rested protectively on her stomach. "The baby makes me tire more easily, that's all." Yates frowned. "We can go slower." "No," Ruby said firmly. "Every hour matters. I won't risk Victor catching up to us because I'm weak." "It's not weakness to care for yourself and your child," Yates countered, but he recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew further argument would be futile. That night, as they made camp in the shelter of a rocky outcropping, the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain. Yates hurried to create a more substantial shelter, using a tarp he'd packed to form a lean-to against the rocks. "Storm's coming," he said, securing the last corner. "Good thing we found this spot." No sooner had he spoken than the first drops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a downpour. They huddled beneath the makeshift shelter, watching as lightning illuminated the landscape in brilliant flashes. "I've always loved thunderstorms," Ruby confessed, her voice barely audible above the rain. "The power of them, the way they clear the air." A particularly loud thunderclap made her jump, and instinctively, Yates placed a reassuring hand on her arm. The touch, his first deliberate contact with her, seemed to hang between them, charged as the air around them. "Sorry," he murmured, withdrawing his hand. Ruby shook her head. "Don't be. It's nice to be touched without fear." The simplicity of her statement struck Yates like a physical blow. That something as basic as a gentle touch could be a luxury to her spoke volumes about the life she'd fled. "No one should live in fear," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Especially not in their own home with someone who vowed to cherish them." Ruby's eyes, reflecting the lightning flashes, held his for a long moment. "Not all men keep their vows." "Some of us do," Yates replied, the words escaping before he could consider their weight. A small smile touched Ruby's lips. "I believe you would." The storm raged through the night, but within their shelter, a different kind of storm was brewing, one made of tentative glances, careful words, and the gradual dismantling of walls built by solitude and suffering. Dawn brought clear skies and a world washed clean. They continued their journey, now entering territory that Yates knew was sometimes patrolled by Comanche scouts. He kept his rifle ready, but was confident that Joshua's influence would ensure their safe passage if they encountered any warriors. By midday, Ruby was visibly struggling, though she made no complaint. Yates called for a longer rest than usual, insisting she eat and drink while he scouted ahead. "I won't go far," he promised. "Just want to make sure the path ahead is clear." As he crested a small hill, Yates surveyed the landscape with his spyglass. The distant smudge of smoke rising from beyond the next ridge indicated they were approaching Joshua's settlement a day earlier than he'd anticipated. Relief washed over him. Ruby needed proper rest and care. Returning to where he'd left her, Yates found Ruby asleep in the shade of a scrubby tree, one hand curled protectively over her stomach. The sight stirred something in him, a longing he'd buried after his parents' deaths, when he'd resigned himself to a solitary existence. He knelt beside her, hesitant to wake her but aware that they needed to continue if they were to reach Joshua's camp by nightfall. "Ruby," he said softly, careful not to startle her. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "I fell asleep," she murmured, embarrassed. "You needed it," Yates replied. "Good news, though. We're closer to Joshua's settlement than I thought. Should reach it by sundown if we keep a steady pace." Hope brightened Ruby's tired features. "Really?" Yates nodded, offering his hand to help her up. "Really. Just a few more hours of riding, and you'll have a real bed tonight." As they mounted their horses and continued their journey, Yates found himself increasingly aware of Ruby's presence beside him, the way sunlight caught in her hair, the determined set of her shoulders despite her exhaustion, the gentle curve of her profile. It was dangerous, this growing awareness. She was a married woman, pregnant with another man's child, seeking safety rather than romance. And yet, as they rode side by side through the wild landscape, Yates couldn't deny the stirring in his heart, a feeling he'd thought long dormant. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally spotted the Comanche encampment nestled in a protected valley. Smoke rose from several cooking fires, and children played among the teepees. As they approached, two mounted warriors rode out to meet them, expressions wary until one recognized Yates. "White Wolf," the warrior called, using the name Joshua's people had given Yates years ago after he'd helped track and kill a wolf that had been preying on their horses. "You come unannounced, seeking Joshua," Yates replied, raising his hand in greeting. "I bring a friend who needs shelter." The warrior's dark eyes assessed Ruby, noting her condition and the fading bruise on her face. With a nod, he turned his horse. "Follow. Joshua will want to see you." They were led into the camp, drawing curious stares from the Comanche. Ruby sat straight in her saddle, chin raised despite her obvious nervousness. Yates felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Joshua emerged from a large teepee, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of Yates. Unlike many of his people, he wore a mix of traditional Comanche clothing and white man's attire, buckskin leggings and a calico shirt, his long hair tied back with a leather thong. "My friend," Joshua greeted, approaching with outstretched hands. "It has been too short a time since your last visit, which makes me wonder what brings you back so soon." Yates dismounted, clasping Joshua's hands warmly before helping Ruby down from Penny. "We need your help, Joshua. This is Ruby Harrington. She's running from her husband, a dangerous man with influence in San Antonio and beyond." Joshua's expression grew serious as he took in Ruby's condition. "Any friend of Yates is welcome here," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "Come, my wife will see to your needs." Relief flooded through Yates as they were ushered into Joshua's teepee, where his wife, Mourning Dove, immediately took charge, clucking sympathetically over Ruby's exhausted state and fading bruises. "You sit," she instructed, guiding Ruby to a pile of soft furs. Rest now. Food coming soon. As Morning Dove busied herself preparing a herbal tea, Joshua led Yates back outside to speak privately. "This woman's husband, he will come looking?" Joshua asked. Yates nodded grimly. "Victor Harrington is wealthy, influential, and cruel. He won't let her go easily, especially now that she carries his child." Joshua's eyes narrowed. "And yet you bring her here, risking not only yourself but potentially my people." "I wouldn't have if I had any other choice," Yates said earnestly. "You're the only person I trust who lives beyond Harrington's immediate reach. She needs time to rest, to decide what to do next. I'm not asking you to harbor her indefinitely." Joshua studied his friend's face. "This woman means something to you." It wasn't a question, and Yates didn't treat it as one. Instead, he looked toward the tipi where Ruby rested. "She deserves better than what life has given her so far." A knowing smile crossed Joshua's face. 3 days I have known you to ride alone, content in your solitude. Now you ride with a woman who brings danger, and I see in your eyes what you perhaps do not yet recognize yourself." Yates shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that. I'm just helping someone in need." "Of course," Joshua replied, his tone making it clear he didn't believe Yates for a moment. "You may stay as long as necessary. My people understand the need for sanctuary. We have provided it for each other in times of trouble." Gratitude washed over Yates. "Thank you, my friend." That evening, after a meal of rabbit stew and corn cakes, Ruby sat with Morning Dove near one of the communal fires while Yates and Joshua discussed recent happenings in the territory. Yates couldn't help but notice how quickly Ruby had been accepted by the women of the camp, their initial wariness giving way to a protective camaraderie when they learned of her situation. Later, as Yates prepared to sleep in the guest tipi Joshua had arranged for him, Ruby approached, wrapped in a blanket Morning Dove had given her. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice soft in the night air, "for bringing me here, for everything." The firelight cast a warm glow on her face, softening the lingering evidence of Victor's cruelty. In that moment, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes reflecting the stars, she looked beautiful in a way that transcended mere physical appearance, beautiful in her courage, her resilience. "You don't need to thank me," Yates replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "Anyone would have done the same." Ruby shook her head, stepping closer. "No, they wouldn't. Most would have sent me away, fearing Victor's retribution. You risked everything for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Yates said quietly. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection that had been forming since that first night in his barn. Ruby reached out, her fingers lightly touching his forearm. "Good night, Yates," she whispered before turning back toward Morning Dove's tipi, where she would sleep. Yates watched her go, Joshua's words echoing in his mind. What did he feel for this woman who had unexpectedly entered his life? Compassion, certainly. Admiration for her bravery. But there was something else, something that made his heart race when she smiled, something that made him want to be the man she saw when she looked at him with trust in her eyes. The days at Joshua's camp stretched into a week, then 2. Ruby thrived under Morning Dove's care, the color returning to her cheeks, her spirit brightening as she learned the ways of the Comanche women. She helped with cooking, sewing, and caring for the children, who adored her gentle nature and the stories she told them from memory tales her father had taught her from books. Yates found himself watching her often, noticing the small changes, how she walked with more confidence, how she laughed more freely, how her hands no longer trembled when a man approached her unexpectedly. The growing curve of her stomach became more visible, and with it came a glow that transformed her beauty into something almost ethereal. For his part, Yates made himself useful around the camp, helping with hunting, repairs, and trading with the occasional white settlers who passed through. In the evenings, he sat with Ruby by the fire, sharing stories of his youth, his parents, his dreams for the ranch. "I've always wanted to plant an orchard," he confessed one night. "Apple trees, maybe some peach. My mother used to say that a home isn't really a home without fruit trees." "That sounds lovely," Ruby replied, her fingers working a piece of leather Mourning Dove had given her to practice beadwork. "Trees take time, though, patience." "I've got time," Yates said, then hesitated. "What about you? What do you want for your future?" Ruby's hands stilled. "For so long, all I wanted was escape. Now that I have it." She placed a protective hand on her growing belly. "I want my child to grow up free, unafraid. I want to build a life where we're both safe." "You will," Yates assured her. "You're stronger than you know." Ruby met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Only because I found help when I needed it most." It was during the third week that everything changed. Yates had ridden out with Joshua and 2 other warriors to hunt deer, returning successful as dusk approached. As they entered the camp, Yates immediately sensed something was wrong. The women moved with tense purpose. Children were being gathered inside teepees, and several warriors stood watch at the camp's perimeter. Mourning Dove hurried to meet them, her expression grave. "White men came," she said without preamble, "looking for the woman. They showed her likeness drawn on paper." Ice formed in Yates's veins. "Harrington's men," Mourning Dove nodded. 3 riders. They asked questions in the trading post near the river. Old man Begay told them he had seen no white woman, but they did not believe. They said they would return tomorrow with more men. "Where's Ruby?" Yates demanded, already dismounting. "In my tipi. She is afraid." Yates found Ruby pacing inside the tipi, her face pale with fear. When she saw him, relief flooded her features, and without thinking, she rushed into his arms. "They've found me," she whispered against his chest. "Victor's men. They'll tear this camp apart looking for me." Yates held her close, his cheek resting against her hair. "They won't find you. We'll leave tonight before dawn. Head north." Ruby pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. Yates, you've already risked too much. This is my burden to bear." "Not anymore," Yates said firmly, his hands framing her face with gentle insistence. "Not alone. Where you go, I go." Something shifted in Ruby's expression, understanding, wonder, and beneath it all, a tentative hope. "Why?" The question hung between them, demanding truth. Yates knew there was only one answer, though he'd been avoiding it for weeks. "Because I love you," he said simply, the words feeling right the moment they left his lips. "I didn't plan it, didn't expect it, but there it is." Tears filled Ruby's eyes. "But I'm still married. I'm carrying another man's child. You think I care about that?" Yates asked, his voice rough with emotion. "The child is innocent, and as for your marriage, a man who beats his wife has broken his vows. The law might not see it that way, but I do." A single tear spilled down Ruby's cheek. "I've come to love you too," she confessed, "but I'm afraid." "Afraid of what Victor will do if he finds us, afraid of bringing danger to you." Yates brushed the tear away with his thumb. "I'm not afraid, not of Harrington, not of the future, only of losing you." When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home, gentle yet passionate, a promise sealed without words. Ruby clung to him, her body trembling not with fear but with an emotion too powerful to contain. They broke apart at the sound of Joshua clearing his throat from the tipi entrance. His expression was somber but understanding. "You must leave before dawn," he said. "I have spoken with the council. We will misdirect the white men, tell them we saw a woman and man heading west. This will give you time to travel north." "Thank you," Yates said earnestly. "We won't forget this." Joshua nodded. "Mourning Dove has prepared provisions. There is a cabin belonging to a trapper I know. It is 3 days' ride north near the Red River. He is away until winter. You can stay there, hidden until the child comes." The plan was set in motion immediately. Under cover of darkness, Yates and Ruby prepared to depart. The horses were well rested, the provisions carefully packed. Mourning Dove pressed a small medicine pouch into Ruby's hand. "For safe birth," she explained. "When time comes, brew this tea. It will ease pain." Ruby embraced the Comanche woman who had become a friend. "I'll never forget your kindness." As the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, Yates and Ruby rode north, leaving the safety of the camp for an uncertain future. They traveled hard that day, pushing the horses as much as they dared, stopping only when necessary for rest and water. By nightfall, they had covered considerable ground, finding shelter in a small canyon where a spring provided fresh water. As Yates built a small, smokeless fire, Ruby organized their provisions, working with the efficiency she'd learned from Mourning Dove. "You think they'll follow us this far?" she asked, her voice steady despite the concern in her eyes. Yates considered the question honestly. "Harrington won't give up easily, but Joshua's people will lead his men west. By the time they realize they've been misled, we'll be at the cabin, hidden away." Ruby nodded, her hand absently stroking her swollen belly. "The baby moved today while we were riding. Strong kicks, like he or she is ready for adventure." A smile spread across Yates's face. Without thinking, he reached out, hesitating just short of touching her stomach. "May I?" Ruby took his hand and placed it where the baby had been most active. For a long moment, nothing happened, then Yates felt a distinct push against his palm. "That's amazing," he breathed, awe written across his features. "It is, isn't it?" Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not fear. "For so long, I worried what kind of life I could give this child, whether we'd always be running, always looking over our shoulders." Yates covered her hand with his. "Not always. We'll find a way to build a life where you're both safe, I promise." The journey to the cabin took 4 days rather than 3, as they were forced to make more frequent stops for Ruby's comfort. When they finally reached it, a sturdy log structure nestled among pine trees near a bend in the Red River, Yates felt a profound sense of relief. The cabin was simple but sound, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, a rope bed in one corner, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "It's perfect," Ruby said, surveying their temporary home. "Like a gift from heaven." They settled into a routine over the following days. Yates hunted, fished, and kept watch for any sign of pursuit. Ruby made the cabin comfortable, using skills learned from both her previous life and her time with the Comanche to create a warm, welcoming space. Together, they prepared for the baby's arrival, now only months away. As autumn painted the surrounding forest in vibrant hues of red and gold, their love deepened. Each day brought new discoveries the way Yates hummed while he worked, the stories Ruby had loved as a child, the dreams they both harbored for the future. "I've been thinking," Yates said one evening as they sat before the fire, Ruby's back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her growing middle. "When the baby comes, and when it's safe, we could head west, California maybe, or north to Colorado territory. Somewhere Victor Harrington has no reach." Ruby turned in his arms to face him. "What about your ranch? Your home?" Yates shrugged. "Land is just land, home is." He gestured to the space between them. "This, you, the baby, that's home now." Tears welled in Ruby's eyes. "You'd give up everything you've known, for you?" "Yes." There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt in his mind. "Besides, there's good ranching land to be had out west. We could build something new together." Ruby kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, she pressed her forehead to his. "I don't deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world," Yates countered, "and I aim to spend my life making sure you get it." Winter came early that year, blanketing the forest in snow and ice. The cabin, well insulated and stocked with firewood, remained snug and warm. Ruby's time grew nearer, her body heavy with child, her movements slower but no less determined. It was on a clear, cold December morning that her labor began. Yates, who had faced outlaws and wild animals without flinching, found himself terrified as Ruby's pains increased in frequency and intensity. "What can I do?" he asked helplessly, watching as she paced the cabin between contractions. Ruby, remarkably calm despite her discomfort, directed him to prepare morning Dove's tea and to lay out the clean cloths they'd set aside for this purpose. "Then just stay with me," she said, gripping his hand as another contraction built. "I need your strength." The labor lasted through the day and into the night. Yates never left her side, supporting her as she walked, rubbing her back when the pain became intense, whispering encouragements when her courage wavered. As dawn approached on the second day, Ruby's efforts were finally rewarded with the cry of a healthy baby boy. Yates, following her instructions, cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Ruby's waiting arms. "He's perfect," Ruby whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "Look what we made." Yates, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name, could only nod as he gazed at the small, red face of the newborn. "What will you call him?" Ruby looked up at the man who had risked everything for her, who had shown her what love truly meant. "Daniel," she said. "After my father." "Daniel," Yates repeated, touching the baby's cheek with a gentle finger. "Welcome to the world, little one." As winter yielded to spring, the small family remained hidden away in their forest sanctuary. Daniel thrived under their care, growing stronger each day. There had been no sign of Harrington's men, but Yates remained vigilant, never venturing too far from the cabin. It was during a rare trip to a distant trading post for supplies that Yates heard the news that changed everything. Victor Harrington was dead, killed in a confrontation with a business rival over a disputed land deal. The shooting had been ruled self-defense, and Harrington's assets were being divided among various creditors who had emerged after his death. Yates rode back to the cabin as fast as his horse could carry him, his mind racing with possibilities. When he burst through the door, Ruby looked up in alarm from where she sat nursing Daniel. "What's wrong?" she asked, clutching the baby closer. "Nothing's wrong," Yates said, kneeling beside her. "Everything's right. Victor's dead, Ruby. You're free." The news took time to sink in. Ruby sat motionless, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions: relief, disbelief, a complex grief not for the man but for the dreams she'd once had before they turned to nightmares. "Are you certain?" she finally whispered. Yates nodded. "The whole territory's talking about it. It happened over a month ago, but news travels slow out here." Ruby looked down at Daniel, peacefully asleep in her arms. "He'll never know his father." "Is that such a tragedy, considering what kind of man Victor was?" Yates asked gently. "No," Ruby admitted, "but someday he'll ask questions. And we'll answer them honestly, in a way he can understand when he's old enough." Yates took her free hand in his. "Ruby, this changes everything. You don't have to hide anymore. You can go anywhere, do anything." Fear flickered in Ruby's eyes. "What if someone else from Victor's family tries to claim Daniel? He's Victor's heir after all. From what I heard, Victor died in debt. There's nothing to inherit but trouble." Yates squeezed her hand. "Besides, no one knows where you are or that Daniel even exists. As far as anyone in San Antonio is concerned, you disappeared without a trace. Slowly, the implications began to dawn on Ruby. "We could go anywhere," she murmured, a tentative hope blooming in her voice. "Or," Yates said, his heart pounding, "we could go home, to my ranch, make it ours." Ruby's eyes widened. "You'd still want that, after all this time away?" "More than ever," Yates confirmed. "I've had a lot of time to think about what matters. The ranch is good land with room to grow. Daniel could have a proper childhood there with space to run, horses to ride. And we could build that orchard, together." Tears filled Ruby's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, "let's go home." The journey back to Texas took them through Joshua's territory, where they stopped to share their news and to thank the people who had given them sanctuary when they needed it most. Mourning Dove fussed over Daniel, declaring him strong and healthy, while Joshua pulled Yates aside. "I see the spirits have blessed your path," the Comanche observed. Yates nodded, watching as Ruby showed Daniel to the women and children who gathered around her. "They have. More than I deserve." Joshua clasped his shoulder. "A man who risks his life for another deserves much." "You have found your heart's home, my friend. This is a rare gift." "I know," Yates said softly. "Believe me, I know." They arrived at the McAllister Ranch on a warm day in early summer. Timothy Henderson had kept things running smoothly in Yates's absence, though he was overjoyed to see his neighbor return and astonished by the family he brought with him. "Folks had all kinds of theories about where you'd gone," Timothy explained as they settled back into the farmhouse. "Some said you'd been killed by Comanches. Others thought you'd struck out for California gold. No one guessed you'd found yourself a wife and child." Yates and Ruby exchanged a look, having agreed on their story during the journey home. "Life has a way of surprising you," Yates said simply. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side to restore the ranch after its long vacancy. Ruby brought new life to the old house, adding curtains, planting flowers, filling the rooms with laughter and love. Yates cleared land for the promised orchard, planting the first saplings with Daniel strapped to his chest, telling the infant boy about the trees he would climb someday. Their nearest neighbors accepted Ruby and Daniel without question, respecting the McAllisters' privacy. If anyone found it unusual that Yates had returned with a ready-made family, they kept such thoughts to themselves. In the frontier, people's pasts were often left unexamined as a matter of courtesy. On a perfect autumn evening, with the first stars appearing in the twilight sky, Yates led Ruby to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. Daniel, now crawling and babbling his first words, was being watched by Mrs. Henderson for the evening. "I wanted to show you something," Yates said, gesturing to the vista before them. Fields stretched in one direction, pastures in another, with the ranch house and barn nestled in the center. The saplings of their new orchard stood in neat rows, small but promising. "It's beautiful," Ruby said, leaning against him. "Everything we've built together." "There's one thing missing," Yates replied, his voice suddenly serious. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, worn box. "This was my mother's." Ruby's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. "I know we've been living as husband and wife in the eyes of our neighbors," Yates continued, "but I want to make it official, properly. There's a circuit preacher coming through next week." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Ruby Harrington, will you marry me? Be my wife in truth, not just in name." Tears spilled down Ruby's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." As Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, Ruby gazed out at the land that had become her home, at the life they'd built from the ashes of fear and loneliness. From that first desperate night in a stranger's hayloft to this moment of perfect happiness, the journey had been long and often dangerous. But standing here, with the man she loved, with their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Texas sky. Ruby knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 1 week later, they stood before the preacher in their own front yard, surrounded by neighbors and friends. Daniel, dressed in his finest clothes, sat contentedly in Mrs. Henderson's lap, chewing on a wooden toy Yates had carved for him. "I, Yates McAllister, take thee, Ruby, to be my lawful wedded wife," Yates vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Ruby, radiant in a simple white dress she had sewn herself, repeated the vows with equal conviction. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Yates bent to seal their union with a kiss, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, Ruby found herself momentarily alone on the porch, watching the revelry with a full heart. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. McAllister," Yates said, joining her with Daniel in his arms. The boy, tired from all the excitement, rested his head on Yates's shoulder, his eyes heavy with sleep. Ruby smiled at the sound of her new name. "Just thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed in a year." Yates nodded, his free arm circling her waist. "For the better, I'd say. Definitely for the better." Ruby leaned into his embrace, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't hidden in your hayloft that night?" "If you had sent me away, no," Yates answered honestly, "because I couldn't have. From the moment I saw you, something in me knew you belonged here." Ruby turned in his arms, careful not to disturb the now sleeping Daniel. "I love you, Yates McAllister, with everything I am, everything I have." "And I love you, Ruby McAllister," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and Daniel, you're my world now." As they stood there, a family united in love and law, the future stretched before them, bright with promise, rich with possibility. There would be challenges ahead, of course, as there are in any life. But together, they had already overcome the worst that fate could throw at them. Years passed, and the McAllister ranch prospered. The orchard grew, bearing fruit that Ruby transformed into pies and preserves sought after by everyone in the county. Daniel grew too, strong and kind-hearted, with his mother's dark hair and an independent spirit all his own. He was joined by siblings, first a sister, Emma, born 2 years after Yates and Ruby's wedding, then twin boys, James and Thomas, 3 years after that. The past was not forgotten. Ruby kept a small box containing her father's pocket watch and a locket with his picture, which she showed to the children when they were old enough to understand the complicated history of their family. Daniel knew that Yates had not given him life, but had given him something equally precious: a father's love, freely chosen and unconditional. On the 10th anniversary of the day Ruby had sought shelter in Yates's barn, they stood together in their thriving orchard, watching their children play among the trees heavy with ripening fruit. Yates's arm was around Ruby's waist, her head resting against his shoulder, their bodies fitting together with the comfortable familiarity of a love that had only deepened with time. "Did you ever imagine we'd have all this?" Ruby asked, gesturing to the scene before them, the beautiful home they'd built together, the land they'd nurtured, the children who filled their days with joy and purpose. Yates considered the question, thinking back to the lonely man he'd been, resigned to a solitary existence. "No," he admitted. "I never dared to dream this big." Ruby turned to face him, her hands framing his beloved face, now bearing the distinguished lines of a man in his prime. The fear that had once shadowed her eyes was long gone, replaced by a serene confidence born of safety and love. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not sending me back." Yates smiled, drawing her close. "Thank you for finding me," he replied, "for showing me what it means to truly come home." As the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, the McAllister family gathered on the porch of their home for the evening meal. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the orchard trees. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings, Yates and Ruby knew with absolute certainty that they had found something rare and precious, a love strong enough to overcome fear, brave enough to embrace second chances, and deep enough to last a lifetime.